Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. So today we are going to talk more about childcare financing, going a little bit back to basics on sort of a little bit more about how the system works now and the sort of long-term planning that's gone into the solution that's on the table today. And then this afternoon, we're going to talk about provider taxes and some charter changes. We are also going to need to revote S94 because your committee chair had a headache yesterday and forgot that we needed to both vote on the amendment and the bill. Also, maybe you all had headaches too, but so we're going to revote that later today. So starting off, Sarah Kenny, if you could join us and share all your thoughts. I don't think you've been in here this year.
I have not. I'm so happy to be here.
Maybe you can even tell us what Lexington Rapids is. I don't know.
I'd be happy to. Yeah. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm Sarah Kenny, and oh my gosh. So this is the fun of working at Let's Grow Kids as you go to the copier and accidentally pick up things like this, which is a lovely sloth coloring book page, it would appear. So we'll just talk that way. I only have a 14-year-old, so I don't have a toddler to blame it on. So I'm Sarah. I'm the Chief Policy Officer for Let's Grow Kids. I want to thank you very much for inviting me to join you today to talk about S56 and its consideration of how to provide long-term sustainable financing for Vermont's childcare system, which I know is the part that you all are focused on. We at Let's Grow Kids are deeply grateful to all of the legislators and administrative officials who've been working for many years on this issue. A lot has gone into where this bill is today, and we are really grateful for that. You also have worked really hard over the past few years to stabilize and strengthen Vermont's childcare system while we moved toward this transformative legislation. And we're really eager to finish that work alongside you. I was thinking last night, so we had this big rally yesterday afternoon, which was a really powerful moment with early childhood educators and parents from all over the state coming together. And I love those moments because it just feels so immersive. And it was just reminding me of why I do this work and have been at Let's Grow Kids for the past 8 years. And I was remembering the first week that I was employed at Let's Grow Kids. And I come from a background of doing work in domestic and sexual violence, advocacy against domestic and sexual violence. And so my first week at Let's Grow Kids, it was like a full immersion into a whole new topic area. And the very first data point that I learned, which has very few things have stuck with me over the past 8 years, but the first data point I learned was that an infant's brain is making 1 million new neural connections every single second. That is, it boggles my mind because my mind is not an infant's any longer, but the fact that your brain in the first 5 years of your life is developing so rapidly, right? It's where we literally set the foundation for everything that's to come in your life. And you all know that that's why it's so critically important that we do everything we can as a state to support children in those first 5 years of their lives and make sure that we are setting the stage for everything to go well in their lives and for all those neural connections to form and grow and not prune themselves, right? So that's what our job is here together, is to make sure that we're taking the best possible care of children in their first years of their lives. And a really big part of that is the environments where they spend their days, right? And that's why investments in quality childcare and early childhood education for all children are so critically important. And you'll hear from pretty much anybody you talk to in the early childhood field that providing that quality classroom is really driven principally by the teacher in the room with them, right? By the adults in their lives who set the stage for that neural development that's happening in the early years. So that's why it's so important that we're talking about how do we invest in a system that holds those children, holds families, makes it so that we are setting up the strongest possible foundation for the future for all these young children. I thought I would start with a little bit about Let's Grow Kids because I haven't been here yet this year. And so for those of you who may not be that familiar with us, we are a nonprofit that has been actively working in Vermont for over 20 years to strengthen Vermont's early childhood education system. And the roots of our work stem from strategic initiatives that started many years ago, like decades ago, that were mentoring family childcare homes in the state. So those home-based programs you all have been talking about a little bit, and launching pre-K pilots throughout the state. So before Act 166, We had folks who are currently on our staff still who were working decades ago to help school districts and local communities even think about how to do pre-K and what those partnerships could look like. And so that led us to our focused mission today, which is to ensure that all Vermont children ages birth to 5 have equitable, affordable access to high quality early care and education by pursuing policy change at the state level. So that's my part of the work, right? Pursuing policy change at the state level, by supporting people power, by elevating the voices and experiences of Vermonters. And that is has felt like a really powerful part of the work. And it's what some of my colleagues at our organization do, which is just talking to people about their experiences. I will say when I was pregnant 15 years ago, I knew I had to save for college, right? That had been drilled into me from the time I was young. I had no idea that I needed to start saving for childcare when I was in middle school, essentially, right? I could not find childcare for our son until he was almost 2 years old in Burlington. We completely transformed our lives. We sold my partner's business. I went back to work part-time. We pieced it together. We hardly saw each other for the first 2 years of my son's life. We were just talking to somebody about this yesterday. We were just stressed all the time. And it's still so real for me how that felt. And that he's now 14, almost 15 years old. And nothing has changed since then. And it felt so isolating for me. I felt like it was a personal failure on my part, that I just couldn't make it work. And I was, I had a master's degree, like I was a professional. Surely I could find a spot for my kid. And so that's what we've been doing at Let's Grow Kids, is all those individual families. It's one of these moments where you sort of realize you're not alone and it's not your personal problem. This is a systemic failure, and there is a solution to this systemic failure. And it's one, as you've heard from others, this is a problem we can solve in Vermont at a state level, at scale. So that's part of our work too, is supporting all of those people around the state and business owners and everybody else who's been impacted by the childcare crisis to be able to come together and figure out what the solutions could look like. And then we also do this work through our programs work, and that is working to prepare the childcare system for this transformation. So we have a team that's been working really closely with early childhood educators for many years to increase the quality of childcare around the state, to expand capacity, and I'll talk more a little bit about that in a minute. And also to support the early childhood education workforce through professional preparation, through networks, and lots of other projects that our team has been working on. So our campaign now has over 35,000 supporters from all walks of life, and that includes families, early childhood educators, business leaders, and community members who believe that this child care bill, with some additional changes, is the vehicle through which our state can give children a strong start and build a better Vermont for generations to come. So it's really important, the work that you're doing here. We're really grateful that you're diving into it and that you all are going to find the financing to make this work. So a little bit of background, childcare is essential, as we know. The past 3 years have been absolutely devastating for what was an already fragile childcare system. The impact of the pandemic and the widespread workforce shortages that are present everywhere in the state have presented unprecedented challenges for this field. Unsurprisingly, early childhood educators and childcare programs have risen to the occasion again and again and again over the past 3 years, providing crucial supports to families and employers, even while their day-to-day work has been extraordinarily difficult. So a parent was just testifying yesterday morning in House Human Services and was talking about how this is a population where you just can't convince them that it's not a good idea to cough directly into somebody's mouth. Like, you cannot tell an infant, right? Yeah. You can't tell them that it's not okay to sneeze in your face. So it's just like in the middle of a public health epidemic, it has been so extraordinarily difficult for folks. And they have been open, many of them, since the very beginning of the pandemic because they were needed for essential workers. So they have stepped up over and over and over again. And now we're in this moment where pandemic aid to childcare programs ended last month. So they have been sort of kept afloat for months through federal ARPA investments, and those have gone away. And workforce shortages obviously are still plaguing the field because we have not been able to significantly raise wages or benefits for these incredibly important people. Childcare investments right now present both a key solution to our broader workforce crisis in Vermont and a vital opportunity to address long-standing structural challenges and inequities in our system. So I want to give you a little bit of information about just what's been happening. I mentioned the early work that our team did and with lots of others around the state on mentoring of childcare programs and doing universal pre-K pilots. There was also, I was reminded yesterday when there were all these early educators there who've been working on this issue for so long, trying to create policy change. There was a worthy wage campaign back in the 80s and 90s that was, still the same messages that we're still using today in 2023. We haven't really made any traction on them yet. So there have been folks advocating on this issue for a very long time. And then in 2015, the legislature really stepped in and said, we need to figure out what to do here. So that was 8 years ago, right, that the legislature created the Blue Ribbon Commission on Financing High Quality Affordable Childcare. And I'm happy to share links to all those documents with you all if that would be helpful. But so that was, almost a decade ago that folks were working on this, said we need to figure out how to chart the course for this solution. So,
and what did the Blue Ribbon Commission say?
Yeah. So they met, it was a legislatively created commission. They met over the course of a year, basically, and the report came out in 2016 and laid out essentially the trajectory for what is in S56. They said, we need quality childcare in Vermont. It's going to be expensive to do that. And the state needs to invest because there is a market failure in the childcare system. So we know that families are paying far more than they can afford. And at the same time, early childhood educators, the people who are the workforce behind our workforce, are getting paid among the lowest wages in the state. And most of them have no benefits. And that is inexcusable because of the work that they're doing, the critically important work that they're doing. So the Blue Ribbon Commission said the state needs to invest in creating quality childcare. They laid out sort of a vision for what that quality looks like. And Representative Taylor, you were talking yesterday about the RAND report's overall assessment of what a quality program looks like. That was built in large part on what the Blue Ribbon Commission had done back in 2015. So those ideas have been out there for a long time. And as you were discussing yesterday, the principal driver of quality is the people who are providing that service to children. We know that one of the most effective ways to prevent adverse experiences for children is one great relationship between an adult and a child, right? And for many families and for many kids, one of those really critical relationships is their early education provider. So we need to have folks in those positions who are respected, who are valued, who are compensated accordingly, who are well prepared for that work. So the Blue Ribbon Commission kind of laid that out and said people should, figure out how to make this happen, essentially. So then I think it was 2017, Building Bright Futures, who I hope you all can hear from.
I'm going to see if they can come in tomorrow.
Oh, great. So they have been leading a lot of this work. So they convened and we partnered with them to convene a summit, I think it was 2017, of Building Vermont's Future from the Child Up Summit. I think you were there, Representative Kornheiser, right? Yeah. And so that was, I think, over 300 people from around the state with various perspectives, early childhood educators, parents, lots of folks who are providers of other services that families rely on, all coming together to say, what could our future childcare system look like, where children are well cared for, the people who care for them are well cared for, and we have a system that actually works. And so that summit generated all kinds of ideas. And then there was a think tank that was created in, I think it was 2018, the Building Vermont's Future from the Child Up think tank. And they came out with a whole list of recommendations. And those led to what you're looking at today in the bill. They really said the Child Care Financial Assistance Program is the mechanism that we have, the lever that we have in the state to create change. We need to look at our current system, right? We're not Finland. We can't do a fully public system where our, public schools are taking children from birth. That's just not feasible in this moment in the state of Vermont. Maybe if the whole country were leaning that way, but so let's look at the system that we have and how do we invest the resources to expand so that the capacity so that all families have access, make sure that it's quality and that the folks in those programs are well supported, and that we're getting the best outcomes we can for children. So all of that work then led to H-171, which was passed in 2021, which is now Act 45. And that bill laid the foundation. That was just in the last legislative session. Many of you got to work on that bill. That laid the foundation to achieve an equitable, affordable, and accessible early childhood education system in Vermont by the end of 2025. That was the goal set. And that bill set really important goals for our state. The first is that all families with young children have affordable access to high quality early care and education. Your sticky note situation is really making me happy this morning. No, I love how colorful and bouncy they are. It's like having slingies on the table. Oh, no, I work in the early childhood education world. We're all about toys on the tables. And yeah, I brought you the brain flakes from the office this morning. So that you have affordable access to high quality early childhood care and education, that no family spends more than 10% of their annual income on childcare, and ensuring that Vermont's early childhood educators are fairly compensated and well supported. So those are the three pillars, right? And each of these has to happen in concert, where we are fairly compensating the people doing this work. But in order to do that, we have to also make it affordable for families, so they're not bearing the whole brunt of that, and make sure that we have access for all families and all children in the state. And I've heard you all talking a little bit over the past couple of days about that capacity question and how do we get there. So while Act 45 established some important interventions in the short term also to try to stabilize our early childhood education system in the midst of a global pandemic, so there were resources like emergency resources directed to programs, the system has continued to struggle and remains in crisis today, as you have been hearing. In a survey of childcare centers last year, the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children found that 86% of programs reported experiencing staffing shortages right now, and you're seeing that play out. I'm sure you're hearing from families and programs in your communities that programs are only able to be open from like 8:30 to 3:30, and that does not work for many working families, that they are having to close classrooms, that families are getting calls first thing in the morning that their childcare program classroom isn't going to be open that day because they don't have staff to cover the classroom. So it's playing out in lots of really devastating ways right now. We have experts on our programs team who provide technical assistance and support to the early childhood field. So a big part of our staff is folks who are actually working on the ground, as I said, getting the system ready for investment and working to just try to stabilize and help programs get by right now. And that team gets weekly, if not daily, calls right now from program directors who are desperate because they cannot make it work and they are on the brink of closure. We're constantly hearing from programs that are about to close around the state, and we're doing what we can to try to help them, but without significant state investment, there's just not much to be done right now. So that's really devastating. And they are managing overwhelming levels of staff burnout right now. We are losing people to, as somebody said the other day, to like banks, big box stores, and bagel shops. You name virtually any other industry, and they're paying more, and you can get better benefits than you can working in the early childhood field right now, which is not okay. In a recent survey that was done by a national group, 35.5% of early childhood educators here reported that they are considering leaving their job. And the primary reason driving that is low wages and lack of benefits. Without increased pay and benefits for early childhood educators, programs will continue to lose staff and be forced to close their doors. The only way right now that programs can accomplish that, raising wages and paying benefits, is by passing on those costs to families, who in many cases are already paying much more than they can afford. And you've heard about this as well. Sometimes more than 30% of their income, more than their mortgages, more than their rent. That's the only way that programs have right now to be able to make any changes in their program, is passing those costs on to families, and the families can ill afford that. So this is why state investment is so crucial, and why investments in family affordability and early childhood educator compensation have to go hand in hand. So
can you go a little deeper on that?
Yeah.
So just sort of like the supply shortage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. So we have a report, and I think I sent social the link to this report called the Stalled at the Start report. That some of my colleague Katie Salina, who's our policy and research analyst, is here this morning, and she works on this report along with our colleague Jen Horowitz. And we've been producing this report since 2016. So every 2 years we do an analysis of the supply of and demand for childcare in the state. So that shows, and it's based on, we don't, as you've heard from Joyce Manchester, we don't have exact data about how many kids are enrolled in childcare programs in the state, because it's a whole network of private businesses, right? So we know what their desired capacity is. We know what their licensed capacity is. We don't actually know how many kids any individual in their care at any time at scale. So the methodology that we've used to create this report really looks at estimates of what's the reported desired capacity of childcare programs. So what are they willing to serve right now? How many kids are they willing to serve right now? And then for the likely demand, we look at the the likely to need care population. And I heard you all talking yesterday morning a little bit about the percent of families and the percent of families with children under 5 who have all available parents in the labor force. So that's the sort of the proxy that we use for what's the likely demand in the state. I sent the link to the report. I am not expert in all the details of it, but it has county profile pages. So you can see for each of your counties, what's the supply and demand. I will say it's bad everywhere without going into great detail about sort of the overall numbers. The supply is hugely lesser than, how am I trying to say this? The demand for childcare is much bigger than the actual supply that exists in our communities. And that will not come as a surprise to any of you, because I'm sure you hear constantly from people who cannot find childcare. And there are lots of reasons for that. I'm starting to lose track of what testimony has been in what committee.
I think
focusing on
getting really clear on the reasons for that and solutions that have been outlined in past Blue Ribbon Commissions and reports. Really helpful.
Yeah. So, and I've heard a little bit of discussion about the regulations that were updated in 2014. So the state of Vermont updated regulations for childcare programs in 2014. And they were largely driven by safety concerns, federal requirements, sort of evolving science and the best practice of early childhood education. And they were really important for making sure that children are safe and that our programs are adequate quality around the state. And they were handed to childcare programs with very few resources to comply with them. And that is always a challenge, right, in any field. I will say that childcare programs, by and large, figured it out. Let's Grow Kids stepped into the breach, and a lot of our programs team were providing on-the-ground support to folks. But the state did not invest at the time that we were asking people to do, more. And that definitely had an impact on family childcare homes. Although, I think you're going to hear from Janet McLaughlin from the Child Development Division later this morning, and she can talk more with you about this. She has just updated some graphs about sort of the overall supply of childcare in the state. And it has diminished some, but it's not like there was a big precipitous drop when the new regulations came out. And much of the supply problem was in family childcare homes. And it wasn't so much that many more were closing, it was that new programs weren't opening. And that again is because we just did not there was this new set of regulations, and for family childcare homes, it had been decades since the regulations were last updated at that point. So it felt really big, and there was no attendant infusion of resources to help people be able to comply.
Were those regulation upgrades, was that legislative action or was it?
I think it was rulemaking, because the regulations are through rule. I would not swear to that because that was before my time, but I know that the regulations are these nice thick books that CDD maintains. And again, they are largely driven by federal requirements, fire code, like health and safety concerns, and they're good. And most childcare programs would tell you that it's good. We want to have regulations that ensure that children are safe in these environments. We have had tragedies over the years, and we want to avoid that at all costs, right? We want to know that not only are children safe, but that they're being, supported to have the best possible growth during those critically important early years. So that has been happening over many years. And as we said, it's virtually impossible to find staff for these programs right now because the wages and benefits are so low. So we have this systemic failure where we have not invested state dollars or federal dollars significantly into this system. So we are underpaying early childhood educators, and the whole system has been balanced on the backs of the people working in these childcare programs and families who are paying far more than they can afford. And then the impact, is felt by families, by parents having to leave the workforce, by grandparents having to come out of retirement or leave their jobs to care for children. There's so many ripple effects in our communities right now. So right now we're in this moment, and the good news is that the opportunity has never been greater to solve this problem. So it feels really dire. And, I talk every day to childcare programs around the state who are in such a bad way, and that can start to feel really depressing. But they also say to me, I have never had more hope than I do right now, and that's because there's such a robust conversation happening in the legislature. It feels like it feels tangible that hope is in sight now. So please make that a reality for them. So earlier this year, the long-awaited early care and education financing study from the RAND Corporation, which you all have had a chance to walk through, and that was commissioned as a part of Act 45, right? So the Act 45 set those 3 goals for the state: that no family is spending more than 10% of their income on childcare, that families have access, and that early educators are compensated on par with their colleagues in similar professions. And then at the same time, you commissioned 2 really important studies. One was a systems analysis looking at the governance of early childhood education, and one was the RAND report, or the financing study, about how much does it actually cost to achieve that high quality vision, and what are some financing options to get there. And those 2 reports were really important, and in part because they validated everything that has come to date. So we had the RAND Corporation, highly regarded international experts who have done work on cost modeling in early childhood education in other states, are some of the national experts on this, came in and said, y'all are on the right track. So thinking about the Child Care Financial Assistance Program as the mechanism by which we can infuse state resources out to programs, we can ensure that early childhood educators are getting better wages and benefits through that system, and we can support more families to be able to afford childcare. So what you've been hearing about the RAND report, right, is that what Joyce was walking through yesterday with you with her beautiful charts and graphs. And somebody last week explained to me the difference between charts and graphs, and I still have not retained it. That and capital AO are, I think, 2 things that I'm just never going to be able to hold in my brain. So the RAND report was looking at the cost of care model, right? And this is something we've been talking about in Vermont for years. We've been working towards it. And the RAND report really took a look at, based on the work of the Blue Ribbon Commission and other work people have been doing for many years, what is the actual cost of providing high quality childcare, right? And they came up with some estimates for that. And said the way to invest in that, the way to achieve that is through the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. So you want to raise the rates that you're paying to child care programs so that they can pay according to a compensation scale that is set, so that you know that if you are an early childhood educator in the state, you're going to be paid at least this much to be in this kind of a position in an early childhood program, at least this much to be in this kind, like this much to be a lead teacher, this much to be in this role. And that you can use state resources to infuse into the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, and ask that programs, when they receive those rates from the state, are assuring that they are paying in accordance with those paid guidelines. Does that make sense? That's kind of the mechanism that the RAND report laid out, which is what folks have been talking about, including the legislature, for many years in Vermont as the way to do this. So as you're raising those rates that the state is paying to programs, that also raises rates across the board, right? Which is why you see the expansion of eligibility in the Child Care Financial Assistance Program in S56. So you're raising the rates that the state is paying to programs, and then you also need to raise the number of families who you're providing support to, because as you saw in Joyce's charts yesterday, otherwise you're creating that really precipitous cliff for families, right? So as you're raising rates in programs, that means rates go up for everybody. So you also need to be expanding the universe of families who you're supporting with the system, so that you're not causing families to suddenly be paying, 50% of their income for childcare. So this is the model that has been set out. So, and the RAND report confirmed that there is a direct path forward this legislative session to create this more equitable system where every child has access, regardless of their zip code, their ability, their racial or ethnic background, their health needs, or their family composition. So we want to create this universe. And although your colleagues down the hall are still working to craft the House's version of S56, and they're doing great work down there, they're working on it right this moment, there are some fundamental components of the bill that are critical to solving our childcare crisis, the pieces we've just been talking about, and which we're counting on your committee to fund. So at the heart of the bill and of the legislature's work over the course of the last several years is setting in motion this transition to a model of child care financial assistance where we're reimbursing programs based on the actual cost of high quality care. And that's driven by a professional tiered compensation for early childhood educators. And that transition has to happen in concert, right? The expanded support for families to help them pay for those increased rates. So some of the specific parts of S56 that focus on that transition are affordability for families through expanding CCFAP, and you all have been talking about that we strongly support the Senate's proposal to expand the program up to 600% of the federal poverty level. And Joyce walked you through yesterday those charts that show why you have to go that far in order to make sure that you're not creating these really precipitous cost increases for families. And also the expansion that would allow lower income families to have no family share up to 185% of the federal poverty level. So the state would provide full subsidy to families up to that level. And then the second part is this idea of increasing investing in increasing compensation for early childhood educators. And that's accomplished through a couple different mechanisms in the bill in S56. The first is these increased rates that are paid to childcare programs through the CCFAP program. So that allows programs to increase pay and benefits to their employees. And the goal that's set in the bill is that as we move over the next year to a true cost of care model, it has some, the bill as it passed the Senate has some reports back. We're encouraging your colleagues to actually look at how to implement that now without even requiring another report back, or how to implement it next year as phase 2. That we shift to that cost of care model, and we require that if you are going to receive these funds from the state through CCFAP, that you are assuring the state that you are going to pay at least a certain level of increased wages and benefits to your employees. So that's one. Oh yeah, sorry, Senator Wood.
Do you have any explanation, any of the studies that you did, of why wages haven't gone up to keep people in the workforce so that they can then afford childcare?
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate and basic explanation, which is that the only way that programs can do that is to raise rates for families, and families just cannot afford to pay anymore, right?
People who are in families who are working, why are those wages not going up in order to keep those people in the jobs that employers need them in?
You mean for the general public? Like, why aren't everybody's wages increasing?
Well, kind of that question, because if the families can't afford it and then they're not working, then the employers don't have the workers.
Right.
What is going on with the wages? Do you have any info on that?
No, I mean, I could talk about within the early childhood education workforce about wages, but for the broader population, I'm sure there are lots of theories. I'm not in the context, so.
Okay.
Dive into that.
I'm not going to try to answer that question. I'm just going to suggest
Wonderful.
don't ask that question about anyone who has a kindergarten or above age student, right? And so I think it's just really interesting to me as we think about our continuum of education, which I believe begins at birth. We have very different expectations about who and how we pay. Like we don't ask a person who has a first grader how come their wages aren't going up so that they can pay more.
I'm not putting the burden on the families at all. I'm not trying to do that at all. I'm seeing if you had any information about how, if the market is supposed to be working, why is it not working to pay people who are working enough to afford the bills?
I mean, so we don't think about first grade education as a market-based business. We believe that to be a public good. And I think some of this conversation that is educating a 3-year-old a public good. And should we stop asking market-based solution questions about whether...
Right. I think what I'm hearing you say is, why aren't people in general being paid more so that they can afford higher rates and childcare programs, right? And that I don't have the answer to. That feels like it.
I'm wondering how, you've had any.
Yeah, no, I know this body has been debating minimum wage policies for a long time, and it's not my area of expertise. So. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
And I don't want to take up a lot of time for your
That's okay.
Presentation.
I'm almost done.
I do want to hear the end of it, but do you know where the breaking point is? So when a mother or a parent needs to go to work, there's a car, there's clothing involved, there's a bunch of other incidental costs in addition to daycare. So where is the breaking point that makes it worth it for the parent to work?
Yeah. I don't have a very specific answer to that. I will say what we hear from families over and over again is that because the childcare cost is such a big driver of that, it's sort of, that's the biggest cost that many families have. For a lot of folks, it's more than mortgage or rent. It's more than your car payment. It's more than, all those incidentals. So that, I think, for many families feels like that's the thing that breaks it. And especially, and this is true for a lot of families I know personally, it's after your first child. A lot of families can kind of almost make it work, right? You heard from Joyce yesterday that families just we patch it together, right? We make concessions. And it's not, in my situation, it wasn't through any choice. It was, I didn't have a choice. So we made it work. But for a lot of families, when you think about having another child, that's when the breaking point hits. So I know so many families for whom, as soon as they had their second child, or when they had to make the choice between having a second child and, having to leave the workforce, or they had the second child and suddenly everything became untenable. And I think because those childcare costs are such a big portion of your budget, that feels like the thing that has to go in order to be able to afford food and insurance and all the other things that you need as a family. So I think it's a great question, Representative Branning. It may be that, folks who have looked at basic needs budgets and your experts at JFO have a more scientific answer than I do, but I would say sort of qualitatively, that's what I hear from many of the families who we hear from on a daily basis, that it just feels like childcare is the intractable piece of their budget, that there's no wiggle room for it, right? It's not like you can bargain with your childcare program to lower your rates or something. And so I think for a lot of families, that's just the piece that they just can't manage.
I'm going to try and listen to all the presenters that we have this week about this topic. I actually, most years that I've been here in the legislature, I've submitted a bill that would reduce the tax liability for stay-at-home parents.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was one stay-at-home parent in the family, that tax liability would be equal to the amount of money the state would have paid into the daycare system for that family. But I didn't submit it this year.
Yeah.
I didn't submit any bills this year, but I wonder about that, I know in my district, I often get calls from parents who don't really want to work. They want to stay home with their children. They had children because they love them. They want to nurture them.
Yeah.
And they want to do that at home, but they, for whatever reason, can't afford to do it. Or
Yep.
they don't think there'll be a job for them in 4 years when the child is in school. And
Yeah. And I was just talking to somebody yesterday about there's a national group that does a cost calculator for parents who, in the early years when you can't find childcare or you can only find part-time childcare, there's a cost calculator to calculate over the course of your lifetime. What does that mean in terms of, and it's, largely women who are in this position. What does that mean in terms of your lost Social Security income, wage growth, retirement savings? And it will calculate for you like your lifetime losses. And it is incredibly sobering. I don't necessarily recommend it if you were in a position like I was, because it's really depressing. And I think that's just that's the reality that we're in. I think you're right that for some parents, they would love to be able to stay home, but that's just not the economic reality that we're living in. And I think the parents that you're talking to are in the same boat as many that we are talking to around the state, where just the reality of our world is that for most families, if you have two parents, they both need to be working in order to afford all the expenses. And for single parents, it's bad. So it's just, well, I think investments in childcare, for us this is one of those levers that we can actually control here in the state of Vermont, and it's a possible solution. We have all the tools that we need. We have the roadmap laid out for us by decades worth of work to say this is the way to make it happen, and it allows families that choice, basically. Like if you want to stay home and your family can make that work, great. But we want people to be making that choice and not having that be the only option for them, because it has huge detrimental lifelong economic impacts for those parents that you're talking to. Yeah.
Try to keep it brief, but in part answer to Carol's question, may eventually come back if we continue this talk, but there's no, there's wild disparity between income groups and employment groups on who's getting raises and who's not. And it varies very much from state to state, I think. So we can ask why people aren't getting adequate wages to pay for childcare, and it's in many cases it's sort of broadly circumstantial. And we could spend a week on it, maybe learn something.
But maybe not in the final month of the session, right?
Not right now.
Just want to check. Because I do think, I mean, Carol, I think your fundamental question is, I think both of your fundamental questions is really, really important. Like, why do we have the situation that we're in?
Right.
And, you know,
And there's no
But you-
linear relationship between someone's family's income and chooses to have more children. I mean,
and there's, yeah.
Can't grasp it.
And we're in the situation where we have a market failure for something that maybe shouldn't have been a market in the first place.
Yeah.
That's a public good, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, and we want, you know, we're also in the midst of a demographic crisis, which is driving so much of what's happening with our economy in Vermont, right? And for so many families, the decision about whether to have children, you know, whether to start families, whether to grow families is driven by childcare costs and accessibility, and that's just not okay. Yeah,
That's true. I know families who've told me I have another baby, but I can't afford the child.
exactly.
That's true.
Yeah, yeah. There was just somebody testifying to that yesterday down the hall. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember when my child was born, my aunt, who also has an only child, said to me, you know, with one child, you can like almost always just find someone who can hang out with them.
Right.
Like if you want to go out for dinner or work or whatever, but she's like, and when you get to two, just know you tip over. Like it's not a small favor anymore. It's a large favor.
Yes. Then you're actually
It's hard.
paying somebody to do it. Yeah.
Why didn't someone tell me that?
So you're playing zone defense,
Right.
it's 2-on-1.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes. Man on man versus zone defense. Yeah, exactly. As a fellow parent of an only child, I can relate. Yeah.
That's it.
So back to thinking about compensation for early childhood educators, which is at the heart of so much of this and so much of what you all were talking about in terms of growing capacity. The other piece that's in S56, in addition to this really fundamental, we're going to infuse the system with resources so programs are able to pay their staff better wages and benefits. There are also readiness grants for childcare programs that are in S56, and that's a really important part of this puzzle. And those are contemplated. So all of these CCFAP changes wouldn't take effect until January of next year. And in the meantime, we know that pandemic aid to programs just ran out last month. They're in a really, really difficult spot right now. I mean, they've been in a difficult spot for decades, but it's really acute right now. So this would provide grants out to programs for the next year to be able to sustain. So a lot of programs have used those federal ARPA dollars to be able to start increasing wages a little bit and providing like hiring bonuses and start to think about providing some level of basic benefits to people. So it would allow programs that have been able to do that to continue that until next January or through the next year, and also provide just ongoing resources for programs to be able to stay afloat right now. And then there are quality and capacity grants in the bill, which would help programs to increase their level of quality and expand capacity around the state. And that can include supporting early childhood educators with professional preparation or wages and benefits. So there are a lot of really promising pieces of this bill to move us in this direction. I did want to talk a little bit about building capacity in the state, because that's something that, again, our programs team at Let's Grow Kids has been working on over the past several years. You all, the legislature, has allocated funding every year for the past since 2019 or 2018. The legislature has allocated funding and the administration in the state budget every year to grow capacity of childcare around the state. And Let's Grow Kids has partnered with the Child Development Division to administer those grants. So we have a team of folks at Let's Grow Kids who have been working with childcare programs and aspiring childcare programs all over the state for the past 4 years to administer those funds. We have done 2 grant rounds a year, and it's for childcare programs to open, new childcare programs to open, for programs to expand. and for programs to increase quality. And I'm actually just gonna open my computer because I want to give you a little bit of a couple of numbers about what we've been able to do with that program. I will say that we have not made a huge dent in terms of the overall capacity in the state because we have essentially just been sort of keeping things afloat. I can share this, these PowerPoint slides with you all too, but the Make Way for Kids is what we call the grant program. And then there are childcare capacity grants. That's another piece of the work that we've been doing together with the state. So we have been able, as of the end of December, we have been able to invest $6.4 million working with the state into expanding childcare capacity in the state. And those investments have yielded 3,716 new slots opening in the state and 705 improved slots. So those are existing programs that applied for funding to increase the quality of the program.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, that's actually, those numbers are impressive and thanks to Let's Grow Kids for those. But I'm thinking about the fact that Let's Grow Kids is by definition, a time-bound program. So after 2025, how do you imagine that going?
Glad you asked that question. I do want to say that, and I don't have this number in this slide, but a good portion of those slots that have opened have been new family childcare homes coming online too. So we have two of our staff at Let's Grow Kids are former, one is currently a family childcare home program and the other is a former family childcare home program. So that's been a big focus of our work. Because those family childcare programs are such a critical part of our infrastructure in Vermont, especially in rural areas of the state where there's just doesn't have the population to support a big center or even a small center in some places. And they're also just a really positive environment for some kids. So we've been able to do that expansion. And some of that has been additional ARPA funds that were put into the program. So we've been able to make that. You will see from Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin's data that we have not been able to overall increase the number of slots in the state. But I will say that when I look at the capacity in other states that have not done this kind of investment in capacity building, it is way more dire than what we're facing right now. So we've essentially, through these investments, been kind of able to keep the system afloat. If we were in a solid market environment for early childhood education programs, we would have dramatically increased the capacity. And I tell you this because, it's been really important investments that you all have made. And the reason that they've been successful is that we at Let's Grow Kids sort of match those state dollars with the technical assistance that our staff provides. So we have provided really extensive support to people who are either expanding or starting programs to do we make the applications as easy as possible, and then we support them every step of the way with the application and with navigating all of the regulatory hurdles that you need to get through to open a new childcare program with business and business technical assistance. Because for a lot of people who get into the early childhood education field, they do it because they love working with kids, not because they're bookkeepers or, financiers. And yet, as a childcare program director or owner, you have to know how to do all of those things. So our programs team does a lot of work providing sort of business support for people of how to run the childcare business. So we've provided that kind of technical assistance, which has worked. So I tell you that because I know that we're all really concerned about being able to grow capacity once we make these investments in the state. That's a really key part of what we're trying to achieve, and it is possible. I think the work that our team has been able to do demonstrates that you can, if you provide the right supports for folks, you can increase capacity and scale it up quite quickly. The biggest constraining factor for programs right now, about 26% of those slots are not online yet, and that's almost exclusively due to staffing shortages. And that's because they just can't yet afford to provide the wages and benefits that will allow people to thrive in an early childhood education position. So as Representative Andrews was saying, Let's Grow Kids is a time-limited organization. We go away in 2025, and a big part of our work has been thinking about what of our work needs to last beyond us. So some of the work that we've done has been just like time limited. We're going to infuse resources here and there, and things can carry on without us afterwards. But we have definitely realized that this capacity growing work and the business and technical assistance that we provide to childcare programs needs to outlive Let's Grow Kids. So the good news is that the state has also recognized that, and some of the ARPA childcare discretionary dollars that came into the state that were approved by the Joint Fiscal Committee in, I guess, 2020. 2022, I don't know, time has no meaning anymore. But whenever the ARPA childcare discretionary grants were approved, a chunk of that was to go to setting up a business and technical assistance program in the state. And so First Children's Finance is a national group that does this exact work, growing capacity, business technical assistance to childcare programs, loan financing for childcare programs, supply and demand sort of analysis around where new programs are needed. So they work in, I don't know, many other states, like 17 other states, I think. And so they got a contract with the Child Development Division and have just opened up a Vermont office. So they have, I think 2, maybe 3 staff people right now that have just been brought on board. And Erin Roach is the new executive director of First Children's Finance Vermont and is terrific and is already doing a ton of work. So they will be transitioning to be the entity that can do this once we're gone, essentially. So the contract that they have with CDD is for a business and technical assistance program, 2 childcare programs, and then the work that First Children's Finance does in many states encompasses a lot of what we do and even more. So that kind of data analysis of what is the supply and demand in different parts of the state, where do we want to prioritize putting new capacity? They're great.
I didn't hear that about Erin doing it. It's great.
I know, it's very exciting.
I'm very excited to hear this. And I'm just wondering, are they also going to do any work, or could their charge be expanded to do work where we have anti-discrimination policies and we have explanation of how you sign up for healthcare benefits and things like that? Would they also do those, could they be asked to do those kind of HR hub work for the spokes of the providers?
That's a great question, Representative Odie. I think I would suggest you ask that to Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin when she's up after I am, because I don't know exactly what the scope of the contract is right now or what the vision is, but I know a lot of folks, including your colleagues down the hall who are working on this bill, are thinking about that sort of administrative services, the components. We at Let's Grow Kids have been supporting a lot of programs with a shared services model, which is kind of what it's called in the early childhood education world. And that, it's been really promising, and COVID has just really complicated things, because some of the promising practices were like shared substitute pools, but when you have no substitutes, the shared substitute pool doesn't really help. Yeah, and things like back end, bulk ordering together. So we have supported, there are networks that exist around the state for childcare programs to come together and sort of support each other in many ways. And there are some places where we've helped them form business collaboratives together. So they're looking at, how can we buy insurance together, like disability insurance or whatever. So that is definitely work that's happening in the fields. There are some national organizations that are really pioneering this work, and Vermont has one, as in many circumstances, has been one of the leaders in trying to figure out how to make this work in Vermont. And I think it could benefit from some ownership, especially after we go away, and some more formalizing. And I know that your colleagues in Human Services are thinking about that.
Wow, thank you.
That's what I had to say to you all. My conclusion is that we really look forward to working with you and your colleagues on behalf of the thousands of children and parents and employers and community stakeholders and Vermonters from every corner of the state who have come together right now because we need a solution to this problem. Vermonters can't go another year without an equitable solution to this crisis. We have put it off and put it off and put it off, and we cannot afford to lose another generation of children. We need to support them right now. So we're relying on all of you. And I really thank you for your commitment to making things work for our families and our youngest children.
Well, the first step we should take.
Yeah, S56, I think, is the first step to take. Yeah, and this is what I was getting at, is you can't really tease out one piece or another. Like, you can't invest just in compensation for early childhood educators without supporting families, because they can't bear the costs alone of supporting early childhood educators. So, and you can't just create more affordability for families without investing in the early childhood educators and the capacity of programs to be able to meet the increased demand when more families can afford, right? Like, they have to go in concert. And that's what, we've been trying for. Well, I've been at Let's Grow Kids for 8 years, and every year we've been like, what if we did this? What if we did that? And we always come back to, this is what needs to happen. It needs to be these tandem investments. They need to happen at the same time. and really quickly and with significant infusion of resources, not just like the dribs and drabs, which have been helping keep the system afloat, but are not solving the crisis overall. And I will say we're not alone. Vermont is not alone in this moment, right? Every single state is struggling with this. And there are some states that have taken a few steps ahead of us. So New Mexico has done some really exciting investments. They have the benefit, I guess, of oil in their state, which is those revenues are funding a lot of the work that they're doing. But Washington, D.C. has done some really exciting things. And Quebec has for decades been doing work on expanding early childhood education and has seen really impressive results in terms of especially the number of women reentering the workforce. In that province. So there are examples out there. There are lots of people who've been studying this nationally. And every piece of guidance to states and municipalities trying to solve this problem is what we're looking at in S56. This is the way to do it with the universe that we've been dealt, right? Where we have treated this for so long as not a public good, but as a private thing that parents just have to figure out. And this whole network of largely women-run struggling small businesses and nonprofits have to manage. The solution is significant state investment and pairing affordability for families with making sure that early childhood educators are fairly compensated and programs have the resources that they need to do that work.
Scott, Jim.
Any of these other, Sarah, any of these other programs that you study where government's putting big amounts of money into it, are any of them using cost controls on the high side to protect the parents?
That's a great question. And, it's been largely theoretical up to this point because nobody has really made the significant level of investment that's needed. But I definitely think it's worth talking about. We're not there yet. And so as this year, the proposal in S56 is to move partway towards that true cost of care and sort of infuse the first set of resources. As you heard from Joyce, it gets about halfway to what the true cost of care is. As we look at that second step to getting to the true cost of care, I think that's an important question to be figuring out. And there are folks who are thinking about it nationally in terms of, are there guardrails that we need to set in place to make sure that that the costs aren't just continuing to go up astronomically. That is not, I will say that is not every early childhood education program I have talked to ever in my 8 years of Let's Grow Kids. None of them has been making a profit, really. And they all just want to be able to make it work. They're not in it to get wealthy. But I do think that there is definitely reason to think about how do we make sure that when the state is investing, that those resources are going to support the early educators in those programs, and that rates aren't then being jacked up on top of the state investment.
I mean, that's kind of what we saw during universal pre-K that was implemented. A lot of parents thought they were going to get a reduction in their costs because the state was putting money in, and they didn't get that at all. It just stayed high cost for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I think it's important to remember that was the first. Programs have been operating at such a loss for so long that one initial infusion of one sustainable, even though it wasn't enough to actually cover what they were providing, one sustainable option. Didn't mean that they were able to raise wages for for the people working in their programs. I think because that small infusion of resources came in the context of such people were already losing money. So I think that they were just using it to bolster. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
as opposed to passing on savings to families. Yeah.
This going, what if they just capture it and
right. Yeah.
Parents that are struggling to pay their bills
right.
are still struggling to pay their bills.
And that's why we've been looking at the Child Care Financial Assistance Program as the mechanism to do this, because when a program participates in CCFAP, they are already essentially signing a contract with the state or signing an agreement with the state that says, I'm going to abide by all of these regulations. So it's a way to, build in those kind of guardrails as we go forward.
But one of those regulations isn't that they won't take
right.
their fees above that level.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think those are the questions. And I think there's a question too around how do we make sure with the compensation guidelines that we're talking about, how do we make sure that those are enforced somehow, right? That when you accept CCFAP, that's part of the work that's going to be happening over the next year as we move toward that true cost of care. And I didn't talk about this big body of work that's also been happening in Vermont to advance the early childhood education profession. Which is really exciting work that's been happening over the past 4 or 5 years. That's a national conversation that Vermont has been one of the leaders on. There were all these dozens of national organizations that came together to look at how do we take the profession of early childhood education, which has always just been, a bunch of people providing this service, and actually turn it into a profession. If we're asking for states and federal government and municipalities to invest in us as professionals, how do we demonstrate that we are in fact professionals, and that, and with that, how do we know what the minimum compensation will be for those roles? So this has been a field-led effort in Vermont over the last several years, where they've been coming together regularly and looking at these models that are coming down from national groups to say, we do want to become a profession of early childhood education in Vermont. And so they've been doing surveys and conversations with early educators all around the state. And the first decision point was, yes, we as a field want to be called early childhood educators. So that was the first step. We've gone from daycare to childcare to early childhood educators. Yes, we want to be called that. Yes, we want to actually form a profession of early childhood education in the state. And then they agreed, and this has all been through field-led consensus work. We want to have 3 designations for early childhood educators in Vermont. So early childhood education 1, 2, and 3. And this is something that is going to be happening all over the country. Some other states are already doing this, so that regardless of what state you're practicing in, if you are an ECE 1, you'll be able to be at that designation across states, and you'll be able to accept or expect a minimum level of compensation at that designation. So Vermont has been helping to lead that work, and it's really exciting. And that is really factoring in. The RAND report took the minimum compensation model that group has come up with and sort of applied that as what would be commensurate pay for early childhood educators in the state. So that's work that has been happening at the same time. And I think the question is, back to your question, Representative Beck, how do we make sure that those minimum compensation tiers that folks agree would make them commensurate with other professionals who are similarly credentialed in the state? How do we make sure that if you are a childcare program and you're accepting these CCFAP dollars, that you are in fact paying according to what the state is expecting you to pay? So
Doesn't DC have a wage
they do.
scale in their new system?
Yeah, they do. And New York City has wage scales, and there are many other states that are looking at this right now. We're in good company.
There's 3 other people who want to say something. But one of my concerns about this is it's very clear sort of what the problem is and what the solution is. And I think you've really hit on the fact that we can't do just one piece of the solution. We have to do them together. If we only go halfway to the solution, which is, I think, what the Senate bill does.
Yep.
Is that actually, I know it will sort of stem the tide, but is it actually going to solve the supply problem?
It is not going to fully solve your supply problem, no. So there is definitely a part 2 to this, right? S56 is complicated. It's not complicated. It's contemplated as step 1, and then there's a step 2. And part of that is figuring out all of those details of, as we move to the true cost of care, what are the guardrails we need to be setting in place? How does the compensation model fit into that? So there is and I think a lot of that has been thought through, but we have to figure out how it works within the state government. So no, this will not fully solve the problem. It will definitely stave off disaster for sure. It will infuse some incredibly needed resources. It will help programs be able to start raising wages and benefits to their employees, which is really key. It will not allow them to create true parity with other professions yet. But it also, I don't want to undersell the point that it also will provide hope where there has been none for a really long time. So, that's not the goal of the bill, but I think it will be a really incredible side effect that it will infuse much needed resources. It will provide a little bit of breathing room. It will be able to, allow us to start growing capacity again. And it will I think it will provide hope for people who are currently in the field, and also for those who have been contemplating coming in, but it just doesn't make sense for people financially right now. I have other colleagues who do a lot of work with early childhood educators and growing the pipeline of new early childhood educators. And there are lots of great programs that Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin and others can talk to you about for pre-apprenticeship, for high school students, apprenticeship for adults who want to get into the field, scholarships for people who are currently working in the field who want to advance, student loan repayment support programs for folks who are, coming out of school or are already in the field and have student loans. We've been doing a lot to try to grow the number of people who are coming into those professional preparation programs. And it's been very successful. CCV right now has almost 500 people enrolled in early childhood education programs. So I heard you all were talking a little bit yesterday morning about how do we know that we're going to have the people to fill these positions? I mean, we don't. We need over 2,000 new early childhood educators in the state. We can't say with certainty, like by 2026, we will have 2,000 new people, but
500's pretty.
the pipelines are really promising. And that is in large part thanks to some of the scholarships that you all approved with ARPA dollars too. The critical occupation scholarships have really been helping people to do that, the 802 scholarship. So there's a lot of promise out there right now. Historically, though, when high school students are looking at their future career paths, their counselors have been steering them away from early childhood education programs because you can't make a living. And so we've had CTE programs close around the state for early childhood education. And so our team has really been working hard over the past few years to say, not yet, like just hold on. Hope is on the horizon. This is going to be a sustainable profession. We need you. We need students in this field. And now they're able to start saying, have you seen what's happening in Montpelier, right? Like, don't give up hope. Don't close your early childhood education CTE program. We need you. We need to make it work. And let's figure out how we can partner and infuse resources into that. So,
Representative Maslin, Brad,
Yeah,
Anthony,
Try to be.
Odie, and then we're done.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
It's all very helpful. And I'm quite supportive of the bill.
Thank you.
No problem with that. The question that I have, which came up yesterday, if you heard directly or indirectly, Joyce Manchester's testimony has to do with capacity.
yeah,
And we've got a ways to go
we do.
with that, and it's really not directly addressed in S56. I can't put everything.
There are capacity grants in there to grow capacity.
But that's not the point. We can't put everything in one bill. It just doesn't work that way. So as we ramp up the supply side, which is what we'll be doing, and which is what we need to do,
Yeah.
we will encounter capacity problems. At this point in time, I'm inclined to say, well, I'm being a little sarcastic, but maybe not. Let's let the supply side remedy push capacity, but we'll find we need to address it. I think that's the sort of practical reality of how this will play out. And I just wondered if you had some thoughts on addressing capacity vis-a-vis what Joyce Manchester said. We're not exactly sure what it's going to cost,
Yeah, to grow the level of capacity, we'll need to meet the demand.
So what?
Yeah.
So we just push supply?
Well, no, I think you do need to invest in building capacity as well. And so the bill does have $25 million in put toward building capacity, whether in existing programs or to grow new programs or support existing ones to expand. And that's when I was talking about the Make Way for Kids program that we've been doing at Let's Grow Kids in partnership with the state. I think it provides a model for how we can infuse resources into the system to help current programs expand and to help new ones grow.
And this is rather than saying throw up our hands,
Yeah,
it's to wade into it.
yes, exactly.
Solve one problem at a time.
Yeah.
May not be satisfactory to some people, but I think we don't have much of a choice.
I think you're right. We have to do something now, and we will certainly be learning as we go. But the good news is we've been learning as we go for the past couple decades, right? We've been wading in these waters for a while, and we know what the path forward is now. We just have to act.
I wanted to go back to Representative Beck's intuition. He's perfectly right, and I really worry about the fact that the injection of serious money, as happened with the feds with ARPA, triggered a lot of avariciousness around the participants. And the fact that there are private equity firms that are all of a sudden becoming interested in childcare makes me very nervous on that account. A little historical analysis or reminder. When the United States faced World War II, the way its solution to avoid a catastrophic squeeze, if you will, on resources was to adopt price controls. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is make sure that the capacity, that is to say, the number of open slots, always proceeds faster than the rise in the people who are filling those slots. So the excess capacity essentially keeps the margin down. And if you don't think about that, the partial solution that we're talking about now will stall. And that would be a tragedy because it will discourage people from taking the next step.
Right.
Did you want to, I'm sorry, did you want to answer?
Well, I'm happy to say something about I think your point is well taken, Representative Anthony. And I think that the private equity firms question is one that is a new conversation at the national level and is only just, there are 6 programs in Vermont that are owned by an external private equity company, but they are all part of the same group of childcare programs. I was talking to one of the national experts who testified in House Human Services last week from the Children's Funding Project, she does a lot of this work with cost modeling and sort of helping states figure out what the solutions are here. And she made the very fair point that right now, private equity firms coming in and scooping up programs is a problem because programs are desperate. And if we take away that level of desperation for them and make it a sustainable enterprise for somebody to engage in, that they won't sell to private, right? If we make it like a livable wage for somebody to own and operate a childcare program, they won't be in that level of desperation where they're selling off to private equity firms. So,
But that's the point. The aid has to be targeted, categorical. You can't spend it on anything but.
right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Thank you. I share that concern. I also want to say, I heard in Representative Beck's question, part of the answer is a way to build guardrails. And then you very carefully said again, if there's CCFAP attending, that you will have some
Yeah.
control.
So if you as a
Guardrails.
program have.
So I imagine you're considering how to require or whether to require which children are going to be attending it so that you can keep guardrails.
Yeah, so this is the magic of what's contemplated in S56 is that you're expanding CCFAP to a point where I think Joyce said maybe 85% of children are covered by, right? Like you're making it work so that families are incentivized to participate in CCFAP because otherwise they're not going to be able to afford childcare rates, right? And programs are incentivized to participate in CCFAP because every family is going to be eligible for some level of support and we'll be looking for that. So that's why the Child Care Financial Assistance Program is the lever to accomplish all of these pieces. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. It's been lovely to spend time with you. I'm here if you need me
Sarah?
for your good work.
It seems like everyone's taking a break, so we're going to join them.